Esteemed guests and scholars of the Imperium, today we come together to tell a tale of one of our most treasured heroes, Titus of the Ultramarines. Few stories capture a Space Marine's ascendant arc as vividly as Demetrian Titus's. His origins on the agri-world of Tarentus, a planet of sprawling fields and stoic farmers, were humble, yet marked by an unmistakable spark of potential. It was a world far removed from the ceaseless conflict that gnaws at the galaxy. But this isolation nurtured Titus's pure and unblemished resolve. Titus was born into a family whose daily labors fed their bodies and the unending demands of the Imperium's vast populace. Despite their modest means, his family imbued him with a sense of duty that transcended the simple life of tilling soil. When the selectors of the Scout Company arrived, seeking new aspirants, it was clear that Titus was destined for a path beyond the furrows of Tarentus. Like many, his trials on his journey to becoming a Space Marine were brutal and exacting. They were designed to break all but the most resilient and worthy. Yet Titus did not just endure, he excelled, mastering each challenge with a precision and dedication that caught the eye of his superiors. His progression through the ranks was not driven by ambition for glory, but by a commitment to the Ultramarines' ideals and the Imperium's protection. The Second Company, known widely across the void for its valor and effectiveness in battle, was a fitting place for a warrior of such singular focus and skill. Under their banner, Titus became not just a defender of Ultramar, he was a guardian of the Imperium at large, often venturing far beyond the familiar stars of his home to confront threats in distant systems. Titus's role was crucial. Each deployment, each battle, and each victory fortified not just the physical boundaries of the Imperium, but its ideological bastions. So please sit and listen closely as we remember one of our real heroes. The invasion by Hive Fleet Behemoth's monstrous bioships into the Ultramarines' realm marked one of the darkest periods in the storied history of this venerable chapter. Far removed from the heart of his chapter's dominion on Macragge, Titus found himself ensnared by a cruel twist of fate. Isolated from the dire conflict that unfolded on his homeworld. The shadow in the warp, cast by the Tyranid fleets, choked astropathic communication. This insidious effect thwarted the besieged Ultramarines' attempts to summon aid. Yet, through sheer tenacity and the indomitable will of the Emperor's servants, a few astropathic distress calls pierced the enveloping darkness, reaching the distant forces of the Second Company. Upon receiving these harried and fragmented messages, Titus and his battle brothers embarked on a frantic voyage back to Ultramar. Driven by a fierce loyalty to their kin and chapter, they traversed the warp-torn expanses of space, each moment shadowed by the urgency of the dire news from home. However, the cruel velocities of war and warp travel dictated their arrival. They were too late to engage in the battle for Macragge, where the fate of their chapter hung in the balance. Though they missed the climactic battle, their role in the aftermath was no less critical. Titus and the Second Company formed the vanguard of the reinforcing waves, tasked with purging the remnants of the Tyranid invaders from the other beleaguered worlds of Ultramar. Their actions, though less sung than those who fought and fell in the direct defense of Macragge, were vital in the slow, painful process of recovery and reclamation. Lucian Trajan ascended to the Second Company's captaincy, embodying the resilience and adaptive leadership essential for the chapter's recovery. His appointment marked a new epoch for the company, now charged with purging the remaining Xenos taint from the worlds of Ultramar. Sergeant Demetrian Titus, whose valor and tactical acumen had been honed on distant battlefields, found a new purpose under Captain Trajan. Elevated to the position of sergeant of the command squad, Titus was integral to the operational successes of the reformed Second Company. He led numerous kill teams across the afflicted worlds, relentlessly pursuing the scattered broods that lingered as a malignant reminder of the Tyranid invasion. Titus's approach to warfare, particularly his study of alien tactics and strategies, became a defining feature of his military career. Unlike many of his contemporaries, who might prefer the detached safety of tactical data, slates, and second-hand reports, Titus believed in the invaluable lessons gleaned from the immediacy and brutality of close-quarters combat. This hands-on experience allowed him to intimately understand the enemy, enabling him to anticipate Xenos maneuvers and counter them effectively. The camaraderie and shared purpose between Trajan and Titus flourished over nearly a century of joint service. Under the stern yet inspiring leadership of Captain Agamemnon, both warriors expanded their tactical repertoire and deepened their commitment to the Ultramarines' ideals. Titus, ever the selfless servant of the Emperor, found satisfaction in his role, content to contribute to the greater good of the chapter without seeking higher office. As the conflict within our Imperium unfolds, the silent valor and selfless dedication of its defenders often forge path leaders. Such was the case with Titus, whose journey to captaincy was marked by his tactical acumen and a profound dedication to the chapter over personal ambition. It was on the world of Beta Arcturus that his mettle was forged. Beta Arcturus found itself threatened by the Eldari of craft-world Bieltan, who, protective of their ancient territorial claims, had swiftly moved to reclaim it. Their ultimatum to the planetary governor was as swift: a mere 9 hours to evacuate or face annihilation. By the time the Ultramarines received the astropathic distress call, the Eldari sword-wind hosts had already unleashed their devastating assault, reducing cities to cinders with their advance. Captain Trajan and his second were dispatched aboard the strike cruiser Righteous Fury to intervene. Arriving 8 days post-ultimatum, they found Beta Arcturus engulfed in fire, its cities alight and populace in despair. The Ultramarines' counter-assault, bold. Understanding the direness of their delay, Trajan wasted no time deploying his demi-company through a high-risk orbital insertion. Drop pods thundered through the atmosphere, and Thunderhawk gunships roared across the besieged skies, targeting the heart of the Eldari command. This audacious strike aimed not merely to disrupt, but to decapitate the enemy's leadership, hoping to sever the head of the serpent and bring a swift conclusion to the conflict. Sergeant Titus's virtues and valor were on display during this operation. His leadership within the command squad and his acute understanding of Eldari tactics, honed through personal engagement rather than distant observation, proved pivotal. Trajan and the commanding autarch of the invading Eldari fought. Blades clashed against blade, where the fine, artful lethality of the Eldari met the disciplined, relentless fury of an Ultramarine, ended with Trajan triumphantly slaying the Xenos leader. This act was a critical blow to the Eldari command structure, and a stark testament to the Ultramarines' leadership's martial prowess and unyielding spirit. Meanwhile, Sergeant Titus led Trajan's command squad against the elite aspect warrior bodyguard of the fallen Xenos general. The encounter showcased the brutal efficacy of close-quarters combat. With his chainsword snarling through the arcane wraithbone armor of the Eldari, Titus accounted for 3 of these formidable sword fighters. Each fell before the relentless advance of the Ultramarines, their alien blood marking the consecration and reclaiming of human soil. However, victory was not without its cost. In their spiteful retreat, the Bieltani captured a young warrior of the Ultramarines, Leandros, sparking a fierce reprisal to reclaim their captured brother. With the enemy's blood still fresh upon his battle plate, Captain Trajan hastily assembled a combat squad to execute the rescue, entrusting the battlefield's security to Titus. This decision, born of urgency, led Trajan into a meticulously crafted ambush. His noble intent turned to tragedy as he was surrounded and slain by the newly revealed Eldari forces. Titus swiftly organized a counterattack, marshalling his forces with a commander's acuity that would define his future leadership. His immediate action not only secured the recovery of Trajan's body, but also reinvigorated the Ultramarines' resolve to punish the deceitful Xenos. Assuming command amid the chaos, Titus led the strike force that would ultimately drive the Eldari aggressors from Beta Arcturus. Under Titus's leadership, the Second Company not only reclaimed their honor, but also ensured that the sovereignty of Beta Arcturus was preserved against those who sought to usurp it. Though inaugurated amid the somber rites of mourning for Trajan, Titus's tenure as captain of the Second Company was marked by a series of commendable victories that underscored his profound tactical acumen and valor. Following Trajan's body's interment within the grand sepulchre of the fortress of Hera on Macragge, Chapter Master Calgar made Titus's mantle of leadership permanent. Under his stewardship, the company flourished, achieving numerous victories against the enemies of humanity. Titus's leadership was characterized by martial prowess and by a humility that resonated deeply with the core values of the Ultramarines. This humility and his strategic insight earned him the admiration of his peers and superiors alike, including First Captain Agemon and Calgar. They saw in him the embodiment of the virtues that the chapter held dear, a leader who prioritized his company's welfare and the Imperium's objectives over any personal glory. Perhaps Titus's most notable campaigns as captain came 10 years after his ascension, during the events on the Forge world of Graia. Facing the anarchic invasion of orcs. It was during this conflict that Titus exhibited an uncommon resistance to the corruptive forces of the warp, a phenomenon that drew as much concern as it did commendation. His resilience against such malevolent energies, while invaluable in the short term, prompted scrutiny by the Inquisition. Upon the interception of binary distress signals emanating from Graia, these messages, sent by the planet's tech priests, indicated a grave new threat. A warband of Chaos Space Marines led by the renegade Lord Nemeroth had descended upon the planet. In response, Inquisitor Thrax, driven by the urgency of the situation, commandeered the swiftest strike vessel available to make haste toward Graia, thereby irrevocably altering the course of Titus' destiny. Upon his arrival, Inquisitor Thrax was confronted with a harrowing revelation. The actual adversary was not merely the external foes, but an internal betrayal of a most insidious nature. Inquisitor Drogon, a member of the Ordo Xenos, had been possessed by a demonic entity. This malevolent spirit sought to exploit a warp-fueled power source, an experimental device that Drogon had been investigating before the Orc invasion. Under the deceitful guise of Drogon, the demon had manipulated Titus, charging him with the task of breaching the Orc lines to secure this potent artifact. Titus found himself embroiled in the demon's dark plots. While initially driven by the necessity to combat the Orc and Chaos threats, his actions unwittingly served the ambitions of a demonic power. This manipulation and his demonstrated ability to withstand the warp's influence gave Inquisitor Thrax ample justification for his drastic measures. Subsequently, Titus was taken into custody for interrogation, a process few could survive. His removal from the immediate theater of war marked a significant interruption in his otherwise illustrious military career. During his absence, which remains a conspicuously veiled segment of chapter history, Cato Sicarius took over the leadership of the Second Company. For over a century, the fate of Titus remained ensnared within the confines of the Inquisition's custody. The Inquisitor's relentless investigation focused on the enigma of Titus's remarkable resistance to the corruptive empiric energies encountered on Graia. Subjected to a harrowing array of psychic scourging and brutal mind trawls, Titus endured a probing of both spirit and mind that tested the limits of his resilience. Despite these invasive examinations revealing no corruption, Inquisitor Thrax remained resolute in his refusal to release Titus, convinced perhaps of some hidden malevolence or unknown resilience within him. Throughout this grim period, Calgar actively sought his captain's restoration to the Ultramarines' ranks. Calgar's numerous petitions, directed at the elusive and often impenetrable bureaucracy of the Holy Orders of the Emperor's Inquisition, aimed to reclaim his warrior from a seemingly unwarranted captivity. However, whether these appeals were disregarded or lost within the labyrinthine and secretive hierarchy of the Inquisition remains unclear. The silence that met Calgar's requests only deepened the concern surrounding the fate of Titus and his peers. While Titus endured the stasis of confinement within the depths of an inquisitorial fortress, Inquisitor Thrax, his captor, pursued his vigilant oversight over the Space Marines charged with the defense of the Imperium's vast borders. Ever suspicious and watchful, Thrax was among the earliest to voice concerns regarding Lugft-Huron, the infamous tyrant of Badab, whose actions precipitated the conflict known as the Badab War. Over a century, Thrax's stringent scrutiny led him to declare 6 Space Marine chapters as excommunicate traitorous. This decree inevitably fueled further conflicts among the brotherhoods of the Astartes. His zealous oversight extended to instances such as the return of Darnath Lysander from the warp. Having been lost for centuries, Lysander's reappearance was met with Thrax's demands for custody under the guise of verifying his purity. A request ultimately denied by the Inquisitorial representative on the Senatorum Imperialis. Thrax's downfall was precipitated by his final, ill-fated mission against the Grey Slayers chapter. The feral world from which the Grey Slayers recruited was found steeped in the worship of malevolent powers, a corruption that had seeped into the chapter itself. Leading a strike force of Grey Knights, Thrax sought to purge this taint. However, during his investigation into the origins of the chapter's corruption, he was possessed by a warp demon. The Grey Knights, now absolved of any allegiance to the fallen Inquisitor, executed Thrax with the same ruthless efficiency with which they had dispatched the corrupted Grey Slayers. Such is the perilous nature of the Inquisition's mandate. When an Inquisitor falls to the ruinous powers, it triggers an extensive inquisition into their conduct. Thus, a conclave of Ordo Malleus Inquisitors was convened to scrutinize Thrax's dealings, aiming to uncover the vulnerabilities that led to his downfall and implement measures to avert such failings among their ranks in the future. The Red Hunters chapter was tasked with the responsibility of securing and scrutinizing the fallen Inquisitor's extensive holdings. During this solemn endeavor, a Red Hunters kill team ventured to a secluded Inquisitorial watch station in the galactic south, where they uncovered a chilling legacy. Nearly 20 Space Marines, each locked in stasis cells, suspended in time and preserved from decay. Among these was Captain Demetrian Titus, whose fate hung in a precarious balance. It would have been all too easy for the overseeing Inquisitor to bury the evidence of Thrax's overzealous purges, thus concealing the ignominy of her compatriots' actions. However, driven by a commitment to transparency, or perhaps an acknowledgement of the warrior's unjust treatment, they chose instead to liberate Titus and his fellow detainees. They were subsequently conveyed to the formidable bastion of the Death Watch, Watcher Keep, where they were to be meticulously evaluated and their fates reconsidered. Even as he cast aside the memory of Thrax, following the revelation of the Inquisitor's fall to chaos, the scars of his experience remained indelible. These events shifted Titus's perspectives on the Inquisition, imbuing him with a deep-seated wariness and a nuanced understanding of such unchecked powers' complexities and potential perils. While his faith in the Emperor and his Primarch's teachings remained unshaken, his dealings with Inquisitors henceforth would be marked by a cautious scrutiny, forever altered by the trials he endured under Thrax's misguided zeal. With no communication from his brethren since his detainment, and under the heavy burden of perceived disgrace, Titus concluded that he could no longer wear the heraldry of the Ultramarines with honor. Resolute in his decision, he chose to enter the Watcher Keep's Deathwatch ranks as a black shield, thus severing the ties to his former identity and embracing a life of penance and continued service to the Imperium. In the halls and amongst the valorous kill teams of Watcher Keep, Titus, now known as Nullus, a name signifying the renunciation of his past, dedicated himself entirely to eradicating the Xenos threat. His extensive experience from countless battles across the stars lent him a unique proficiency in combat against many of the most formidable alien species threatening the Imperium. Yet, despite his deep knowledge and prowess, Nullus never indulged in recounting his own deeds. Unlike warriors from some chapters who might relish the glory of recounting their exploits, he remained steadfastly humble, focused solely on his duty rather than personal renown. As Nullus, he committed himself to a life that might end at any moment in a fierce battle. This resolution was nearly fulfilled during an engagement against the Tyranids of Hive Fleet Leviathan. This encounter, occurring in the initial throes of the Fourth Tyranic War, underscored the precarious existence and relentless commitment demanded of those serving in the Death Watch. Through this transformation and self-imposed exile from his roots, Titus embodied the spirit of sacrifice and anonymity that defines the Black Shields. His story, marked by a journey from honor through disgrace to redemption. As the sinister hive ships of the Tyranid Leviathan emerged from beneath the galactic plane into the western reaches of the Imperium, disarray swept through humanity's defenders in the area. Previous conflicts, primarily documented on the distant eastern fringe, provided little solace to those in Segmentum Pacificus, who were confronting this existential threat for the first time. The initial chaos mirrored the disorganized responses that had marred humanity's early encounters during the First Tyrannic Wars, painting a grim picture of unpreparedness against the encroaching swarm. While messengers sped to Terra to raise the alarm and the elite Soulblade strike forces were hastily mustered, the watch fortresses of the Death Watch along the Imperium's western bounds stood as the first bulwark against the invasion. These fortresses, steeped in the lore and tactics of Xenos warfare, began deploying their seasoned alien hunters. Watchmaster Vedrian Chanol, known as the Black Castellan of Watcher Keep, swiftly authorized his Watch Company Primus to reinforce the Imperial lines in Segmentum Pacificus, coordinating with the Death Watch forces from Fort Obsidius. Amidst these preparations, Titus, now a seasoned member of Kill Team Kasiran, embarked on a critical mission. Boarding a Corvus Blackstar, they aimed to bolster the beleaguered Astra Militarum forces in the Residius system, which had already been severely depleted by the ongoing demands of the Indomitus Crusade. Yet their arrival was met with immediate hostility. Winged Tyranid bioforms swarmed their gunship, bringing it down and forcing an immediate and brutal confrontation on the surface of the planet. Titus suffered grave injuries from a monstrous Tyranid carnifex during this fierce engagement. Surrounded by the corpses of his fallen Deathwatch brethren, and as his life force ebbed away, he readied himself to offer his soul to the Emperor, his thoughts perhaps lingering on the quiet honor he had sought as a Black Shield, far from the glory of his past. In these desperate moments, on the brink of death, fate intervened in the form of his former brethren, the Ultramarines. Having arrived to relieve the embattled Deathwatch warriors at the planet Kadaku, an Ultramarines strike force discovered Titus. As Leviathan's onslaught across the galactic west unfolded, desperate astropathic cries for aid pierced the warp, dispatched from Terra to all corners of the beleaguered Imperium. The effort was monumental, taxing entire astropathic choirs to their limits as they broadcasted urgent pleas across the Segmente Majoris and even into the tumultuous expanse of the Great Rift. The echoes of these messages reverberated through the cosmos. Ultramar, still scarred from the plague wars waged by the Death Guard and bearing the deep-seated scars of the First Tyranic War, was once again called to arms. First, Captain Agemon, the Tetrarch of Connor and stalwart defender of Ultramar's northern reaches, swiftly marshaled a contingent of seasoned veterans for the journey to Segmentum Pacificus, aiming for the embattled Bastior subsector. Accompanying him was Varro Tigurius, the chief librarian of the Ultramarines. As their strike craft coursed through the Immaterium, Tigurius, despite the encroaching shadow in the warp that threatened to obscure his psychic sight, detected the distinct soul sign of a warrior long thought lost to the chapter, the former Captain Demetrian Titus. Fate had a sense of symmetry. Tigurius traveled aboard the Righteous Fury. This was the same strike cruiser that had once carried Titus and his predecessor Trajan into numerous battles. Now, it surged through space-time, emerging from warp at the threshold of the Residius system. Here, the mighty Righteous Fury prepared to deploy its Thunderhawk gunships, laden with Ultramarines ready for battle. On the surface of a beleaguered planet below, amidst the tumult of war and the wreckage of a Deathwatch mission, lay the broken form of Nullus. The Soulblade Strike Force, under the guidance of Chief Librarian Tigurius, descended upon the Tyranid-infested swarms of Kadaku, with the precision and fury emblematic of the Ultramarines. Their arrival, swift and formidable like a cerulean thunderbolt, unleashed devastating volleys of disciplined fire against the weapon beasts that had overrun the planet. Despite their prowess as Tyranid hunters, shaped by countless engagements with the Xenos threat, the warriors arrived too late to salvage the fate of Kadaku itself. The battlefield, strewn with the remnants of fierce combat, bore witness to the aggression of the hive swarms. In this dire aftermath, the warriors of Watcher Keep, alongside the reinforcing Ultramarines, conducted a methodical retrieval operation. Their primary objective was to recover their fallen and wounded comrades, ensuring that no brother was left behind in the clutches of the alien foe. With coordination, they evacuated most of their contingent back to the safety of the Ultramarines' gunships, hovering above the ravaged landscape. Among the casualties was the figure of the Black Shield, Nullus, formerly known as Demetrian Titus. His body, ravaged in the confrontation with the monstrous Carnifex, lay amidst the chaos of the battlefield. Upon recognizing the gravely wounded warrior, Tigurius, with a sense of solemn duty, issued a direct command. He ordered that Nullus be carefully transported to the Apothecarian Bays aboard the Righteous Fury, their flagship. Titus' wounds were grave. It was thus decreed that he would undergo the Calgarian rites, a series of complex procedures designed to transform him into a Primaris Spacemarine. With a resolve as unyielding as the ceramite of his armor, Titus endured the transformative rites with the same stoicism that had defined his endurance under the harsh scrutiny of Inquisitor Thrax. Emerging from the process, Titus was remade, stronger, more resilient, and ready to serve again. Upon awakening in his new form, Titus was thrust into a role he had not anticipated. He was appointed as a lieutenant under Captain Sevastus Acheran of the Second Company. Acheran, a warrior of commendable skill and valor, had been a mere scout when Titus was last among his brethren. Now Titus was to serve under a commander who had ascended from the ranks he once oversaw, a humbling and rejuvenating assignment. However, Titus's return to the Ultramarines was not without its tensions. Among the ranks were those who harbored apprehensions about reintegrating a warrior who had been so long absent and had undergone such profound trials. Yet, Chief Librarian Tigurius, ever a sage and discerning presence, thoroughly examined Titus. Through psychic means, Tigurius probed and found no corruption within him. His essence was as pure as his firm loyalty. Lieutenant Titus, reborn in both body and spirit, returned to the ranks of the Second Company. With the legacy of his past and the enhancements of his new existence as a Primaris Marine, he was poised to unleash the full fury of the Ultramarines upon the manifold enemies of the Imperium. Once more he stood ready to embody the virtues of his chapter and to carry forth the wrath of the Ultramarines against all who would dare threaten the sanctity of the Imperium.